was first initiated by our group, and then joined together with some other groups based in New York. So this is our last session. Our first speaker will be Zhiren, Vice President of International Campaign for Tibet. And his topic is Why Tibet Matters in a Democratization in China. Here you are.
Thank you. In this discourse on possible democratization of China, among the few things that proponents of democracy in China ought to consider is the fact that if you're talking about the borders of the People's Republic of China, for which you need democracy, then you need to consider the fact that the People's Republic of China is considered a multi-ethnic state, which means there are more than Chinese or Han-Chinese people living in that territory. There are people like the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Mongols, and others whose aspirations also need to be considered in this discourse. And these considerations need to happen in the course of the discourse rather than being consequences, rather than being beneficiaries or being considered beneficiaries. These people's aspirations need to be considered from the beginning, and participation is essential in that. So that is the summation of what I'm going to say. I think there's a way of expanding it. Is that enough for you? I can just...
Yeah, at the bottom, at the bottom, next one.
This one?
Next one. Yeah, that's
No, it should be from the top. Go to slideshow. You go to slideshow here, then you go to slideshow from beginning. Slideshow here. Yeah. Slideshow. Yeah. Then you go
From
to
beginning.
from beginning.
From beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as I was trying to say, to do that as a Tibetan, I would like to encourage all people who are aspiring for a democratic China to look at the Tibetan experience. Because although inside Tibet, the Tibetans do not have the opportunity of experimenting democracy, the diaspora Tibetans since 1959 have been undergoing a unique democratic experiment, which is very much essential for people to understand. And that is something that didn't happen overnight. If you look at the Tibetan governance system of the past, in the pre-1959 system, there was something called the harmonious blend of religion and politics under the Dalai Lama, or in Tibetan we call it Chusi Sungden, where equal prominence was given to both the political aspect as well as the spiritual aspect, because that represented the people's aspirations. In the post-1959 period in China and in Tibet, of course they live under the authoritarian system of the Chinese communists. But in exile, the Dalai Lama was able to implement his vision of a democratic governance. And that governance again began in stages. In 1960, he established a system of people's deputies, which had a say in the running of the administration of the Tibetans in exile. That was very much different from the past, where the people did not really have a direct say in how they ought to be governed. Thereafter, in 1983, the Dalai Lama, in fact, had a democratic constitution for future Tibet drafted, and there was part of it were implemented while in exile. An integral and important part of that constitution was the fact that the people, if the need arises, could impeach the Dalai Lama. So this was again a very dramatic change from the past, where we need to consider the fact how the people look at the Dalai Lama to understand the importance of this. Even then, although the people resisted this inclusion, the Dalai Lama on his own insistence had that stay in the constitution, so that no one was above law. Then gradually the Dalai Lama has been able to change the system in Tibetan governance and exile So to one from rule by him to today rule of law. And that happened, for example, in these stages again in that I mentioned over here. Important part again is through gradual steps, the people began to get more and more decision-making authority. In the past, the appointment of the election of the Tibetan People's Deputies too, gradually selecting the ministers, because the ministers used to be appointed by the Dalai Lama. Then the people were given the opportunity to have a say in the selection of the ministry. Then the people were given a say in how the leader of the administration, which is in Dharamsala in India, would be selected. Then in 2011, the Dalai Lama had the final change whereby he devolved all this political authority to a leadership that would be directly elected by the Tibetan people. So today, the ultimate political leader of the Tibetan people, at least in exile, is elected by the Tibetan people. And one thing that's important in it is in 1992, way back in 1969, even the Dalai Lama said that, but in 1992 it was written down, formulation, where the Dalai Lama said, in the future when there's a solution in Tibet, he will not have any say. He will not have any role, political role in the system. That's important because the Chinese government continued to maintain that the Dalai Lama's struggle for the Tibetan people is to revive his old power and authority. Through this, he has clearly said that he did not want to. In 2011, he went further. He said, not that this Dalai Lama, all future Dalai Lamas will not have any say, political say in the governance of the Tibetan people. So this is something that I think our China democracy proponents need to understand, how democracy has to be evolved and in what are the steps needed to be taken. Today we discuss some of this. And these are my final points, which I think I would urge all people. We need to understand the aspirations of the Tibetan people or the Uyghur people or the Mongol people, because without doing that, even if it's a democratic China, it might end up being that it doesn't represent all people under that China, if all the Tibetans and the Uyghurs are to be considered under that China. So the Chinese communists fail to understand the Tibetan people. A future democratic China should not fail that. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, even as you discuss about a democratic China, you need to understand, where do people like the Tibetans fit in? Today we had conversation, and in all this conversation, maybe I should be frank in saying that Tibet and the Dalai Lama occurred as marginal points in the discussion. If you go by landmass, I think more than half the landmass of the People's Republic are of people outside of the Han Chinese race. So that means we shouldn't be just like marginal. We ought to be part of the integral discussion. And how you do that, I think that's ought to be key. Secondly, in China today, there's this discussion about what's called the second generation ethnic policy, whereby some Chinese scholars, including some Chinese leaders, saying that you should do away with all this preferential treatment for non-Chinese communities, because of that they're having problems in China. Is that the solution? I don't know how you call that in Chinese, but if you understand second generation ethnic policy. So that has to be understood, whether that is the solution. Doing away with the identity of the people is the solution wrong. Then you have to understand the importance of the Dalai Lama, not just for the Tibetan people, but for the future of China. He represents a possible solution for China, which is out of chaos, which will protect China's stability, and his middle way approach, which this morning was laid out clearly, is something that can have impact on China, on the broader Chinese community. And lastly, in all the discourse, people like the Tibetans or the Uyghurs shouldn't be taken for granted. I think, just as today I'm talking within the framework of the People's Republic of China, there are many Tibetans who want a free and independent Tibet. If that were to happen, how would a future democratic China take that into consideration? How would a future democratic China take the aspirations of the Uyghur people, who also there are people there who want independence for East Turkestan? So these are something that need to be understood, and those democratic leaders or proponents need to take steps to win over people like the Tibetans. Thank you.
Should I ask you a question now?
No. Just 1 second. I think Bu Qiong just save a very little time to express his view on Tibet. Save a lot of time. That means we will have more time for discussion. Great, thank you very much. So our next speaker, do we finish the session and start asking questions, or just one by one? Okay, all right. Okay, we carry on because of Professor Peter Kwong wouldn't have something to do, so I just agreed that he just put his talk in front of the others. So next speaker would be Professor Peter Kwong. Yes, thank you.
Oh, I don't need it. Oh. You want to turn it off?
So my talk today is China's democratic prospect in the current global environment. I just want to say this is quite a competitive discussions and maybe trying to provoke, but just be patient with me. Let me just try to say what I think. There's something very important to be considered. There are many conditions that are conducive to democratic movements. Weakness in the quality of leadership, division within the party elites, intrinsic weaknesses in the political institutions, economic crisis, labor unrest, question of loyalty of the public and supporters, or the inability to control the flow of information. What I like to do today focuses on a larger global environment that would help or impede the democratic movement in China. Here I define democracy in the most general and broad terms. That is simply the ability people to participate in the political process. Democracy is a constant struggle. Those who, without it, fight to have it. Those who have it has to be vigilant to maintain it. Most of all, democratic struggles are often operating not in isolation. We've witnessed many times in the past that is spread from one country to another, from region or from one continent to another. Let me just, let's not just debate about the long-term merits of these specific democratic movements, just to see that this is a period of openness, allowing the opportunities for people to participate. And in a very general and broad term stroke, again, if I may, to just give you some examples, what I consider this phenomena of democratic idea from one place to another. 1848, that was one period of Europe known as the People's Spring, and also year of the Revolution, where a series of political upheavals happened throughout Europe. By the way, it was 1948, as you know, Marx wrote his manifesto. Then Revolution 1917 to 1923 was a period of political upheaval, unrest, and led to the revolution in Russia. And also it was a time when the disorder created by the aftermath of the World War I that led to a number of anti-colonial revolutions, such as the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire in Middle East and Balkans, a period, unfortunately, that happened to shape the current geographic map of the Middle East today. 1930s, It was the Great Depression that led to a period of democratic reforms in Europe and in the United States. People demanded more participation, more responsive governments throughout Western countries. This is the rise of many social democratic governments and the institution of social welfare policy in many countries. Then after World War II, 1950 is the period what we now refer as national liberation struggle against colonialism. In Africa, in Asia, India gained its independence. In the Middle East, bringing down the colonial empire of Britain, France, and many others. 1960s, another period of major reforms. United States and Europe, and even Japan. Well, here in the United States, we know the Civil Rights Movement, 1960s, the youth movement, the women's movement, the African American movement, Asian American movement. We refer to this period more of a social revolution that shaped many of the liberal ideology in the West. In the 1980s, countries in South America, one after another, moving away from military dictatorship to electoral politics. In the 1990s, a wave of democratic movement swept across Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, ended the communist era since the rise since 1910s. China was very much affected, incidentally, by this this way of change and revolution. June 4th was, in particular, Deng Xiaoping's attempt to try to wall off the wave of democratic movement sweeping into China. More recently, we could refer to the Arab Spring. So, in short, democratic struggles are often not isolated. What we see is a transference of liberal democratic ideas, aspiration wanting to be free. Again, I'm not suggesting these movements are all positive or in historical terms not always successful. On the other hand, we also see reaction against these democratic ideas, democratic movements, gathering reactionary forces to crush them. Repression against democratic movement is also not isolated phenomena, spreading from one country to another. So what is the global environment today? The earlier panel, we talk about there's a global economic crisis. Capitalist country, the profits shrinking, trade leveling off, stagnant growth spread from Japan, United States, Europe, and elsewhere, even affecting many of the so-called emerging nations. Stimulus policy is not working, low interest rate, deficit spending, and still the economy is anemic. Almost every country now is resorting to printing money, yet they are not getting out this pressure of deflationary economy. The United States is also affected by another crisis that was caused by its policy failure in the Middle East, costing her militarily, economically, and morally. Meanwhile, most Western nations are facing the specter of global terrorism, fear of domestic terrorism, the problem of refugees, and many countries wanting to close their borders, intensifying surveillance, curbing civil rights for their citizens. Government becoming less open, less transparent. In this fearful environment, mainstream media in the Western world are becoming less critical. I'm not suggesting there's censorship, but I do see that coverage and analysis become less and less broad and much more cautious, rarely bringing out critical and dissenting voices. Now, what about China? China's economy is also weaker. Many people see Chinese economy as a bubble. Earlier panel talked about a very, very serious crisis. China's accumulating a huge amount of debts. But China needs to be compared to what's happening to the rest of the world. In some ways, China is different because it is still a producing country, and it is still at this time a creditor rather than a debtor nation, unlike a country like the United States. So it's not how bad things are in China in comparison, but it's in comparison how well she's doing in comparison to the rest of the world. In the meantime, China is using this period to consolidate its influence around the world, securing access to resources, oil, copper, minerals, and all that, securing trade partners, giving aid, signing trade agreements, building roads, opening new trade avenues. So what China right now is doing is basically using the opportunity to establish sphere of its influence. A very much old imperial power model. She is right now in a buying spree, properties, entertainment industries, movies, and most importantly also intellectual and scientific brain powers, specific research facilities. Now, many other countries, out of desperations, they want to trade with China. They want to reach special agreements with China. Not that China necessarily is a good partner, but without option going to the United States, Europe, as they could previously, now China becomes a viable option. Just last week, Canadian Prime Minister went to China, talked nothing about democracy, and just simply tried to reach trade agreements and privileges. This has been done by many other governments, Brazilian governments in Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Greece, Balkan countries, and Africa. And so China is, at this time, swinging its weight. For instance, the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank with a 100 billion capital committed. The countries included Britain, Germany, Australia, South Africa, despite U.S. opposition. Right now, there are 57 countries have joined, leaving the United States and Japan on the outside. Internally, the Chinese government is campaigning against corruption. Now, when Xi Jinping first came into power, I wrote a piece for The Nation. And my comment at that time was the corruption was so insidious, so pervasive, that people are really very, very upset. And that there could very well be public oppositions, open public oppositions. Now, even top Chinese leaders understood this could not possibly sustain. So when Xi Jinping first came in, I was not sure that he could or would want to do it. But as it turned out, he did tackle these to the high ups. You could say that's factional struggle. You could say this is building a cult of personality. These are all right. You may be all correct. But it is something that is getting attention to the party and to the military. And it is, in contrast, a popular policy within the Chinese public, at least so far. So, if you look at from this vantage point, then Xi Jinping's regime is on the upper hand, both internally and internationally, at least for now. That means he has a lot of room to maneuver in controlling propaganda, isolating dissent, using brute force. And he has also invoked nationalism as a factor to gain public support. So I would say that the democratic movement in China currently is facing a difficult passage. Now, however, I'm not suggesting this situation will be permanent. It could change any time. The anti-corruption campaign could be a farce leading to serious unrest in China. People will become disillusioned and finally understand that a one-party system can never cure of its corruption. It could also, another factor, worsening global economy, and finally, seriously, China could not avoid. So, but I'd like to go back to the theme I was talking about. The theme I suggest was that democratic inspirations could come from outside. In fact, this has always been the fear of Chinese Communist Party. All you have to recall is the amount of propaganda and attacks Chinese government have waged against the whole idea of color revolution, which was happened in 15, 20 years ago, 2000, right? And yet, even just last few months, you still see Chinese press attacking European governments, especially United States, trying to use, quote unquote, create the color revolution as a means to undermine China. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that one thing we ought to pay some attention to is what are the international environment, and they could help, and they also could impede what's going on in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Peter Kwong. He's a distinguished professor at Hunter College and the CUNY. I don't know what it is.
City of New York.
Right. Okay. He's talking about, mentioned something which I could describe it as the in the international world, the elephant in the room. The whole world just ignore the big facts, ignoring that. Especially the Canadian Prime Minister visited China without mentioning anything about the human rights and democracy. Okay, our next speaker would be Yu Jie Chen, Doctor of the Judicial Science, New York University Law School. Please.
I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Professor Xia. Thank you. As a Taiwan lawyer, I would like to talk about human rights in China-Taiwan relationship. And this subject, human rights, is very natural for today's audience. But if you would talk to a general audience, then they would think about many other prominent aspects in Taiwan-China relations, such as trade, investment, tourism, cultural exchanges. And human rights in cross-strait relations wasn't even a subject that received any significant attention, say 8 or 9 years ago. And I think it's a very important subject, but I'm going to keep my presentation very short because we have a lot of other speakers. So first of all, why talk about human rights? I've already pointed out this is a very important subject. Why? Because of the closer relationship between the two sides across the Taiwan Strait. And there's a sense of urgency now from Taiwan's perspective. So 8 years under the Kuomintang government, we've seen more exchanges, more activities across the Taiwan Strait. But on the other hand, people in Taiwan have also come to realize that these closer ties with China may come with a cost, and the cost is to undermine Taiwan's democratic way of life and the core values that Taiwan holds dearly, including democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So, for example, the cross-strait agreement signed by former President Ma Ying-jeou's government and China were not scrutinized and monitored by Taiwan's legislative yuan. It was considered just compromising Taiwan's democratic accountability in the government system. And so there's no accountability, and that's exactly one of the things that triggered Taiwan Sunflower Movement in 2004. People on the island have increasingly understood the importance of protecting Taiwan's democracy from China's interference while trying to maintain a peaceful cross-strait relationship. So the issue now is felt more immediate. How to integrate human rights into China-Taiwan relationship? Will Tsai Ing-wen's government do a better job than the Kuomintang government? We don't know yet, because right now, since Tsai took office, the two sides have entered into a new era, and some observers called it Cold Peace, 冷和平. China has suspended many cross-strait activities, including official and semi-official communication. It's putting a lot of pressure on the Tsai government to recognize the 1992 consensus, which in Beijing's view is to say Taiwan is part of China. And this is something that Tsai's government cannot give, because more and more voices on Taiwan are seeking to assert Taiwanese sovereignty and identity. And this is exactly one of the reasons why she was elected. So, given the stalemate in cross-strait relations, does that mean that there's nothing that can be done at this point to better promote human rights in cross-strait relations? I don't think so. I think there's still things that can be done within the Taiwan government's control to better integrate human rights in its China policy. So I would like to propose 3 recommendations, and I would love to hear feedback. These recommendations are definitely not exhaustive, but just to throw ideas out there. So first of all, I think Taiwan government should set the agenda right. By setting the agenda right, human rights issues should become one crucial pillar in cross-strait exchanges, in addition to the economic pillar and cultural exchange pillars. So what does that mean practically? Practically it will mean that cross-strait talks and activities, either they're semi-official or non-official, should include the discussion of human rights, starting from the very entry-level issues such as the protection of security and freedoms of persons from the other side, or talk about legal provisions of human rights in the cross-strait agreements that both parties sign. And then the two sides can proceed to more difficult issues later on when they build more mutual trust in this process. The second recommendation, I would say, before I jump to second recommendation, I want to emphasize the importance of this first setting the agenda, because I feel the Taiwan government has to signal to the Chinese government that human rights issues will not be sacrificed to make way for economic and political cooperation. While doing this, it's important, very important for Taiwan's political parties and actors to see human rights as ends in themselves for improving people's lives rather than instruments for scoring political gains. The second recommendation that I would say is to support more genuine Chinese civil society groups to continue the civil society exchanges. And at this very repressive political climate, this is especially important. And Taiwan has been doing that, but it's not enough. It's quite limited, to be honest. So hopefully this will be continued, this kind of exchanges will be continued and expanded. The third recommendation is to build up Taiwan's domestic legal institutions to better monitor human rights issues in cross-strait relations and make better policies, make better laws that would ensure that human rights will not be violated and democracy will be lived by to in the exchanges of China and Taiwan. So just I'll stop here. I can talk more about legal institutions domestically, but these are just very initial ideas that would give Taiwan a better foothold in terms of promoting human rights in its China policy. And these suggestions, I want to emphasize, do not mean that Taiwan should eventually be integrated into China. This is a very heated political issue. People on Taiwan generally oppose unification. But what I'm saying is, regardless of all the political uncertainties, what needs to be done today is to take a more pragmatic approach and to find ways for Taiwan and China to be able to keep a peaceful relationship that would not only protect Taiwan's achievements in democracy and human rights, but also promote a human rights-minded approach in their relations in order to benefit people on both sides. So I will conclude my remarks by calling for international support for this approach. Today's conference, one of the themes is about international support and attention to China's issues. And I would like to say that human rights in cross-strait relations is a relatively new subject, but it's a very important one that we cannot do without. What international society can do is just to take a step back and give more room for a discussion of human rights in China-Taiwan relations. And second of all, I think, and more fundamentally, is to see the 23 million people on Taiwan as human beings, as those in China who are just craving for a more free way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. We noticed the international world for the last 2 or 3 decades would have already given in dealing with China. It is always, if you give in, the monstrous regime would advance. If you withstand it, the monstrous regime would retreat. So okay, now next would be next speaker is Wu Shaohua, Associate Professor of College. His topic is why China has failed to democratize.
你可以把它收起来，或者你直接点你的，就把它放在那里。对。好来，那个用，你刚才点出来，把它放大。OK。可以把它放成全荧。这全荧。Slideshow.
The middle.
Under one.
Yeah. Okay. From the beginning.
Okay. Thank you. It was such a great pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the organizer
especially Professor Xiaoming. And he and I are Laoxiang from Staten Island. And I've always admired his timing. He's a good teacher, good professor, good scholar, and a good activist. And also I appreciate his invitation. You know why? Because we don't agree with each other on many political issues. He's very, very tolerant. And sometimes I try to compare myself with Professor Xia, and he is activist, and also he's idealist. I'm kind of a lazy. I'm a realist. And so if you want to find hope in anybody, and probably the hope is with Professor Xia, not me. And I'm just observer. And I don't know how many of you have watched the documentary by Carmen called the Tianmen or the Gate of Heaven and Peace. And at the very beginning, he mentions if we are being neutral when it comes to China, you are going to annoy both Americans and Chinese. And I think I'm going to give you an example today. And what I'm going to say probably annoy both American and Chinese. Okay. I think one reason why Professor Xia invited me was I published a book in 2000. It's called Explaining Chinese Democratization. And in a footnote, I made a prediction. I said, if China and outside world stay pretty much the same, I predict that China will become democratic by 2011. I actually give 3 reasons. And according to the assessment at that time, China will reach the so-called zone of transition based on Huntington, which means that China will be rich enough to become democratic society. Second reason, by that time, and 2 generations would have passed since the inception of PRC, and it's very, very difficult to justify communist rule anymore. The third one, because China will celebrate 100th anniversary of the 1911 revolution. Obviously, my prediction was wrong. And I accept it. I don't want to defend it. It's totally wrong. And why I find this is kind of annoying, and unlike Mr. Golden Zhang, he published a book whose thesis on some things, the coming collapse of China. I made a prediction in a footnote. But believe me, and many people didn't cite me for my framework analysis. They cite me for that footnote. And this reminds me of Lu Xingpai's story. And once one of my friends complimented Professor Lu Xingpai, the leading scholar on China at that time, said, well, one of your writings is cited the most in the entire index. He said, well, and most people cite me to send me as a strawman. I just try to criticize it. Same things like me. Many people probably have never read my books, but they cite me saying, well, this guy is foolish, and he made the prediction, I guess. So what went wrong? And I asked myself, I can easily justify myself my wrong prediction, because it's very, very difficult to make any predictions in serious science. I don't want to explain this. But to be more serious, I want to ask myself, what went wrong? Theoretically, there are 3 possibilities. Probably there's something wrong with the object, democracy. There's another possibility there's something wrong with the environment for democratization. And the final one would be there's something wrong with Chinese. So I'm going to go through this one by one. First, there's a limitation of democracy. In the United States, and we cherish democracy really a lot. And sorry, I'm going to say something and not very flattering. Democracy is not something you should idealize. Why is that? First, let me define democracy. Many people think democracy means rule by people. But let me offer a more realistic assessment of democracy. Democracy is a system that legitimizes the free, peaceful competition of rights and interests and views. Let me use Chinese, probably it's more blunt. 为争权夺利，这个提供合法性，就是 it's as simple as this. And the single yardstick of democracy is free and fair and regularly held election of national leader. That's democracy. Let me say 2 things about limitation of democracy. First thing is human beings are imperfect. You cannot have any perfect system. We are silly. We are selfish. You cannot create a good system. Second thing is all state, no matter if it's democratic or not, it is a coercive apparatus And according to Max Weber, he was a brilliant sociologist. State was coercive apparatus. People never govern. People are always governed by others. Third one, we tend to forget the power of bureaucracy in modern time. And on the one hand, we see democracy. On the other hand, we see bureaucracy. It's very, very powerful. Democracy is less substantive than procedural. Democracy does change the method of leadership selection and of popular influence, that's for sure. But don't take it too seriously. Democracy doesn't necessarily allow people a more active role in government. And let me mention Dr. Zhang, Mr. Zhang again, and he mentioned the Chinese people are frustrated. They say they want change, but they cannot do it. I would say, well, in the United States, as an American citizen, I'm frustrated. I want to change the system. I cannot do it. Same things. Don't exaggerate the difference between the Chinese and Americans. In the United States, we have two systems. Over there, one-party system. Over there is a two-party system. Third one, when we talk about democracy, we talk about political democracy. But in real life, do you think democracy really matters? No. Political democracy is very, very, very tiny part of our life. Look at here. Political democracy coexists with undemocratic or anti-democratic practice within family, within schools, within workplace, and within bureaucracy. And let me just give you an example. And universities tend to be very, very progressive and liberal, right? If you talk with untenured faculty member, they are very much like second-class citizens. They don't even talk that much. They try to exercise self-restraint, self-censorship. Finally, probably this is the most important thing when it comes to China. If we are born American, we're lucky, and we are born democratic. But if you want to introduce something new, you have to prove this is very good stuff. This is useful. Research have shown democracy is not necessarily effective means to other goals like state capability or economic development. The Chinese like fuqiang, wealth and power. But democracy is not necessarily a good means to achieve wealth and power. Probably, if you reverse arrow, probably that's right. If you are rich and powerful, you can become democratic, not the other way around. Let me give you a everyday analogy. I think you'll get my point. Suppose democracy is like iPhone 5. All Chinese will love it. Suppose democracy is so useful, I'm pretty sure advanced countries will ban export of democracy, just as they will ban the airplane model to China. It's as simple as this. Let me give you two memorable quotes. And the first one actually is a professor from NYU. He says something like this. It was written around 1990. He says something like this: the everyday life of democratic parties is not a spectacle that inspires awe, an endless squabble among petty ambitions, rhetoric designed to hide and mislead, shady connection between power and money, laws that make no pretense of justice, policy that reinforce privileges. The experience is particularly painful for people who have idealized democracy in the struggle against authoritarian operations. People here probably have a realistic view of democracy, but people in China, they don't. Probably when they think about democracy, they think about American democracy. And when they think America is a great country, they think probably all great things have something to do with democracy. That's not true. We all know Churchill's famous quote, and democracy basically is the least bad system in the world. So that's my first thing. Probably there's something wrong or insufficiency with democracy. Second thing, that's my framework of analysis when I wrote my dissertation and book. Basically, when I ask my question why there's no democracy in China, I look at 5 specific periods: traditional China, Republican China, nationalist China, Mao's China, Deng's China. In each period, I identify one factor that prevents China from being democratic. In the good old days, China had a different tradition. Of course, historic legacy prevent China from becoming a democratic country before 1911. Right now, China become more modern and open, but still, China is ancient civilization. It's very, very, very difficult to change Chinese mind. And so in many ways, China's historic legacy were not heavy burden anymore, but still it was pretty heavy. Second things, during the Republican era from 1911 to 1927, China was divided. China was controlled by warlords. As a result of this, and it's impossible for China to talk about democracy. One scholar say, if there is only one precondition for democracy, that should be the national unity. So during the Republican era, there's no chance for China to become democratic. The third one, nationalism era from 1927 to 1949. China basically was invaded by Japan. If your country was invaded and suppressed by international system, how could you get democratic? Let me add something more in here. And when I come to the second point, local forces, China right now, and in many ways China become more and more unified because of modern technology, like all those wonderful railroad system, and also like internet, and nationalism is on the rise. So on the one hand, China becomes very, very unified, but on the other hand, there are many, many things worrisome from the Chinese leaders' perspective. For example, like Hong Kong, even Hong Kong people would like to want independence. Can you believe this? Taiwan separatist movements. So the Chinese leader and even Chinese people probably have something legitimacy, have some justification for their worry. The third thing is about war system. I mentioned it was impossible for China to become democratic during the nationalist era because China was beaten by foreigners. Right now, international system is very favorable to China. We talk about the universal values, and the United States and West put pressure on China. They try to democratize itself. And there's globalizations, and China is on the rise. So in many ways, international system is in favor of Chinese democratization. But the thing is, the Chinese leader, I would say probably mainly for their self-interest, they're worried because of the color revolution. The fourth one, I talked during Mao's time, the Chinese say, well, we did not want democracy, Western democracy. We want socialist democracy, or socialist system. Right now, and not too many Chinese believe in socialism anymore, but still, there are lots of components of communism and Confucianism in China. I think they work against democracy, Western democracy. The final economic development. Lots of people emphasize the a little bit difficult situation in China right now. But if you look at the past 30 years, China has been doing so well. And Chinese society become richer, and the Chinese become better educated, and the middle class has been growing. And civil society, probably it has been suppressed a little bit by President Xi. But still, there is lots of different groups in civil society. But the thing is, precisely because China improved itself quite a lot, many Chinese actually are satisfied. And when I look at my own 5 factors, my prediction is that if those factors stay pretty much the same, China will become democratic. For me, actually, Chinese actually improved in all those 5 categories. So then I have to accept one thing. Probably there is no threshold for democracy in any country. And also, democracy is not something automatic. And you have to work for it. And the final point is, when I ask myself what went wrong, and I think it had lots to do with the insufficiency of democracy, the probably insufficient environment. The most important thing is actors and their interactions, which means the Chinese don't work hard enough for democratization. Then the question is why? First one looks at the quantity. China has 1.3 billion people. This is the most important thing when you think about anything in China. If you have 1.3 people, you have lack incentive to do anything. Statistically, your effort is meaningless, right? 1.3 billion people. For example, in New York, to tell you the truth, sometimes I don't bother to vote in New York anymore, because no matter if I'm a Democrat or Republican, I know Democrat will win. In China, if there is democracy, one out of 1.3 billion. Why bother if you're a rational thinker? And also, it's very, very difficult for you to change. You can easily change a country like Singapore, several million people. It can rise very quickly, probably can go down very quickly. It's very, very difficult for you to change China. How about quality, which means kind of like culture things? I think all Chinese share the fear of chaos. And right now, there's one thing we should remember. If there's democracy, the democracy would be sudden and comprehensive. You cannot say, I'm going to offer democracy to the property class, I'm going to offer democracy to man, and something like that. Right now, if you want to offer democracy, you have to offer democracy to everybody immediately. Actually, that can create lots of problems, because basically you open the Pandora box. The Chinese are afraid of change. This is not necessarily Chinese, it's human. And I cite Eric Fromm. He basically said modern men attempted to surrender their freedom to dictators of all kinds. The whole idea is sometimes we talk freedom, but freedom can be too much for us. Sometimes we just like to follow rule. For example, change. There are 3 possible outcomes for change or revolution. You may get a democracy. Probably you are going to have chaos as we witnessed during the Arab Spring. And there is possibility you actually are going to have dictators like Cromwell or the British Revolution, or English Revolution I should say, Napoleon after the French Revolution, and Stalin after the Russian Revolution. So don't idealize the revolution. After revolution, probably there are 3 possibilities here. And finally, this is very, very interesting. China become better. China was on the rise. The Chinese are proud. They say, why should I imitate the Western system? Is it possible for us to create something new? And if you read many Chinese scholars, they say, I want to mention some things and which is new and non-Western. And finally, let me say one thing about the power relations among 3 groups of people in China. In any countries, probably there are 3 groups of people: ruling elites, opposition elites, and masses. And personally, when I was a student, to tell the truth, I haven't read about democratic things and for almost 1 decade. But when I was reading, and I really like elitist theories. The basic assumption is in any society, literally in any society, most people are apathetic to politics, so they don't care. Does this ring the bell to you? But there are elites, they're very, very hungry for power. In any society, that's the case. And why like power? Well, power is absolute scale resources, and also power is effective and legitimate too to redistribute resources. So let me be more specific of these 3 groups. If you are ruling elites, as I mentioned to you, these people are born with a very, very strong desire to power. So they're different people. And also they have much to lose. Of course, they will defend their power. And finally, they have their organizational and military advantages. If you don't behave, they put you into jail. They may kill you. It's as simple like this. Oppositional elites, which means these people are probably they're elites, they're capable and talented people. They would like to be in power. But the thing is, here I mentioned several things. For example, political elites. And sometimes people demonize, say, the Chinese Communist Party. The party is not very good, but many Communist Party members are very, very decent people. And in a similar way, many people within the opposition elites, they are very nice people, very capable, but some of them are not very nice and not very capable, just like in the Communist Party. So we should not say, well, one group is perfect, the other is evil. That's not the case. And usually we think about 2 major groups, middle class and intellectuals. And these people may be weak, and the thing is they're human beings. They consider their first self-interest first. And they're not necessarily more democratic in temperament or by nature. And sometimes it's very good for them to cooperate with the government. For example, if you look at the situation in Thailand, you realize the urban people, and they don't get along with the rural people. Finally, let me look at the masses. Just think about this. Several terrorists could cause lots of problems within the United States. But if some tiny amount of people would like to create trouble for the society, they can turn this any society, including Chinese society up as and down. So why many people don't act? Well, they lack will, and let me say why that's the case. We talk about there's huge income inequality within China, but in the past 30 years, China is an expanding pie, which means the Chinese living standard has been improved, and or at least remain same.
How many more hours do you need?
Oh, probably just.
Actually, your time is almost expired, but I offer you
1 minute.
one more minute.
One more
Yes,
minute. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
that's good enough.
Yeah. I think it's chairman's opportunity. Okay. Second thing is, when you talk about masses, they are heterogeneous. They are not unified, and also they have competing interests. As I mentioned, there's rural people versus urban people. And the third one is almost ironic. Usually, the victim of tyranny tend to be its solid basis. I don't want to elaborate, and otherwise, Mr. Yearling will complain. And final one, this is very, very important. Ordinary people will gain little, even if they win. But they may lose a lot, even their head, if they lose. Think about Akio, and he joined the revolution and he was decapitated. And who will become the winner after the revolution? Well, very, very tiny group of people will become leader, they will enjoy it. So that's why people don't act. And so personally, I don't act, and it's as normal as it is. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now your turn. I know you are so impatient now. Okay, all your time now. You have plenty of time. In this session, we save a lot of time, so you have 20 minutes to talk.
The young man is courageous.
Okay, let me introduce you to the public, to the audience. Okay, this is Professor Xia Liang. He came from China not a few years ago from Beijing University. He was sacked off, and he tried to get himself sacked off. So now he's now living in the United States as a research fellow in
Cato.
Cato Institute. Cato Institute, and former professor of economics at Beijing University. And his talk is China's economic plight and a potential disorder.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and also I feel very honored to speak here. And I will try my best to keep you awake. I know that I'm the time. Well, that's a long. I try to make my speech short. So the first question is, what does people know about China? I think that not only for the Americans or Westerners, also this question for Chinese or maybe overseas Chinese. Everybody knows, everybody believes that they know China much more better than the others. So there's a lot of arguments. Well, there's some, I would say, objective figures and facts about China. Everybody pay attention to that, especially some Western leaders, when they visited China, they were so impressed by the so-called economic achievements. Some people call it the economic miracle. But if you study the economic history, you will not think that way. It should not be compared with some small economies. But in the human history, there's a lot of the similar achievements. So we can call that an economic miracle. Well, what does people know about China? I think there's some more negative things about China. It's unequal right of education, employment, and resident benefits between rural and urban China. So I think that if you ask average Chinese whether you are satisfied with your life now, I think the majority of the urban people will say it's okay. Some people will say I'm satisfied. But you ask the rural people, you can hardly get, maybe some people say it's so-so. That means they can survive. But survive doesn't mean that they're satisfied with life, right? So we know a lot of things about the serious pollution of the environment and hopeless treatment to the malign results and a lot of things, especially the prevalent unscrupulous corruption nationwide. Not only for the the officials, but also for professors, academics, and doctors, nurses. You can name it. Any industries, they have a kind of the corruption. Lawyers, judges. So what happened to Chinese? So when they come to the foreign country, like just a few days ago, we found a video about a Chinese old lady. She cried, screamed, and lost her temper at the customs because the custom officer wanted to check her food. And that's very special. Chinese now became more unusual in international community with their behaviors, with that, what do you call? It's kind of culture, but the traditional culture is not like that, right? So a lot of things, I could not mention all of them, but there's some serious things like unreliable food and medication that made a lot of people decide to immigrate to Western countries. US, Canada, Australia will be the priorities they want to choose because they think that they can't survive with those things, and they won't allow their children to have the bad education with something that they don't believe by themselves. And also there are some countries who complain about the unfair trading and monopoly, dominant market condition. For instance, one businessman come from the Western country will say, "Hey, hi, how can you do that?" And the the official will say, "Oh, it's according to our instruction, leader's instruction, or maybe according to the government rule." Then the businessman will say, "Let me read it." No, you can't, because it's our own documents. Documents in Chinese, 文件, that means internal. It was not supposed to expose to others people. That's ridiculous, right? You want to do business with other people, but other people cannot understand what the rule it is. It's not transparent. So China would want to make a rule by themselves. Nowadays, since China has become the second economy in the world, so people tend to say, we will try to set the rule, not only the rule followers as before. So now Xi Jinping tried to talk with Obama. So let's talk about how can we make deal? How can we make the rule together? So that attitude has been changed. Well, I don't want to mention more about the pending economic and political crisis. I think the Golden Chance is here, and everybody got a kind of impression, and some people disagree. I think you said the China's economy would collapse maybe in a few years or 10 years, but it won't happen. As far as it has so powerful control, so they can get taxation as they like. And so they always can find some solution to maintain the ruling. But you say that's a very bad regression, the retrogression from quasi-market economy to the central planned and monopoly-oriented economy. In recent cases, you could say the central planning committee is getting much more powerful. And also they are trying to make the kind of the central planned economy research academy. And they try hard to strengthen the central planning system. So nowadays, I don't think that the scholars can do anything. So many scholars in China, if they want to get the benefits and promotion, they try to just cooperate with the central committee's decision to be what we call just followers. So I would say my basic judgment is China's economy is facing great risk, but it doesn't mean it should automatically collapse or it automatically turn to be a democracy if without people's joint efforts. Within the party and outside the party, that's impossible. And absolute majority of people nowadays, they believe we can do nothing about CCP's ruling. because they are so powerful. So we should wait another 50 years or maybe 100 years. So people are so pessimistic. When they talk with me, they say, "Oh, you are so optimistic." I said, "Yes, I am. Otherwise, I won't talk anything about democracy if it is should happen 100 years later." But you could say nowadays the passive appreciation of RMB would be something. You should notice about this tendency. Its speed is so hard. It will be accelerated. So by this year, the end of this year, it could be 1 to 7. It could be. I mean, the speed is very fast. And so the people nowadays, the urban residents try to change money from RMB to US dollars. Even they don't use it. They just deposit. So labor cost is increasing dramatically in recent years. So how can you compete with other low labor countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, some other countries, even in the African country? So I would say that China's high-speed growth or the benefits of their low labor cost competition should be ending. And I remember several years ago when Li Keqiang and other people talk about the urbanization of China. That is a kind of a new idea. And it means kind of a fundamental political or economic reform for China. They said that's the kind of the thing that could be called a reform. Actually, when they mentioned political reform, it means a managerial system. It doesn't mean the institutional change. It just means the managerial system. So I noticed that Barry Norton, the professor of economics in UCSD, he has some hypotheses. But so many years has passed that people would not believe there will be real political reform or economic reform in China at all. There's a question, can China still keep fast growing in the next decade? The answer, of course, definitely no. So I think the economic crisis will not only bring the bad results for people's daily life, but also it brings something like a social change, or maybe social disorder. When thousands of people out of job, so what will happen? And so many people nowadays, they have the demonstration asking for more wage increase or something. Even for those soldiers, officers, some even policemen. When you say the maintaining the stability, it should be dependent on those people. If their salary or welfare would not improve substantially, they might just give up. They don't want to follow instructions. So I would say the economic matters for CCP's ruling. It matters. It because when the economic foundation has been weakened, that means fewer and fewer people will support the ruling. Fewer and fewer people would give up shooting at the people or beating the people directly. So that's what I maybe optimistic judgment. Well, there's some fast growth actually was driven by administrative authority. Since there's always some incentives for the high-ranking officials, they try to get a kind of good performance to get their own promotion. So there's a very strong competition among the high-ranking officials. But meanwhile, they will not have a long-term consideration for the local residents. They focus on just a 5 years term. They don't care about air pollution or any kind of their economic aftermath. as far as it can achieve so fast. So that would be a disaster for those. I mean, all of the China, you could see that the results. And some people praise highly of their China model, but I don't believe there's any successful China model. Nowadays, even the central government would not mention it anymore. So in Western academic circle, no people really believe in the China model. It's just a political propaganda. Well, that's the process of urbanization and migration of labor. Nowadays, it's getting even less free than that of the 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So the people tends to be maintained in their local jobs. So it would be a kind of the regression. So I would say the bad thing is Xi Jinping emphasized more on regression towards Mao's era and Great Cultural Revolution. And people would argue, say, it's not exactly the same. I agree, it's not exactly the same, but the spirit and nature is the same. So Xi likes it to imitate Mao's strategy and tactics and frequently quotes Mao's sayings. He evaluates Mao so much than Deng Xiaoping. So you could say he consider himself as the best student of Mao. And he also emphasized that CCP and government are not to deny the previous 30 years after 1949, which has been, they're criticized so much during the first 30, after the 30 years of the Chinese ruling, CCP's ruling. So that's unacceptable, I think, that by most people who understand the situation. And also he went to Peking University. He said Chinese university or education will not follow Harvard or Yale. You don't have to follow them. It's just to be number one of Peking University or Tsinghua University. It shows his confidence. It shows that he doesn't want to follow the Western style of education. And actually, he wants to give up all those values. He considers the Western value is quite different with the Chinese value. So, but I don't think he was, from bottom of his heart, he does not believe that so deeply. Otherwise, he won't send his own daughter to Harvard to study. So this is very selfish and cheating strategy. Well, here I show some cases, but I don't want to waste time on that. You see the crackdown on all those people who dare challenge or dare speak in public. Even the American citizen, the Shimanzi, he has 50 million followers in social media. So when he says something, then not long after, he was arrested, and he was accused as, the prostitution consumption. So anyone, if you dare say something, criticize the CCP, then you'll find some excuse to crack down, whether some economic issues, maybe some other things. So including myself, and also the vigorous scholar, right? Because I criticize the CCP's behavior, and I promote constitutional democracy and other things. And I was removed by Peking University. And I heard that even the vice president of my colleague, former colleague, he disagreed with the decision. He tried to persuade them, but it's no use at all. That means it's decided by the top leadership, so he cannot do anything with that. So nowadays you could say, notice that the camera in the classroom, it's not only in Peking University, but in many universities in China nowadays. That means any professor you want to give lecture, there's always camera to supervise you. That's the 7 taboos on saying, which were referred by top leaders in the about 3 years ago, right? Freedom press, You can mention those things. Universal values, you can mention. Civil society, citizens' rights, historical eras of CCP, and so on and so forth. You can mention that. That's the taboos. And also they have the 16 tenets for young faculty members to follow in universities. And nowadays, students and young teachers were demanded to learn Marxism and socialism again. They will spend the night time to concentrated studies. As we were young, when we were young, we were forced to study all those things, but now it comes again. When Xi Jinping talking about rule of law, it actually is not ruling by law or of law. He meant it's all rule by law or rule of law. It's under the leadership of the CCP. So you could see a lot of the cases like that. Use electric baton to beat a woman's face. And there's a lot of conflicts nowadays. Massive demonstration and conflicts with the policemen and even armed forces, with tankers. You see? So many cases. Meanwhile, you could see a lot of the corrupted officials, they have the huge tons and tons of dollars and other priorities like Vice Chairman of the Military Committee, Xu Chaihou and Gu Boxiong, and also they have public concubines, and so many scandals. I don't want to mention more. So that's, I would say the real big tigers are still untouched, like Jiang Zemin's family and Li Peng's family. All those top leaders were not touched. Okay, I'll show you some. I would say this graph, you see, according to the estimation, the turning point should be on the year 2014. By that time, China's growth rate supposed to be higher, but now it's getting flat, even falling down. So that's the difference.
1 minute left.
Okay. That's an environmental fact. You could see the change over the years. It's getting down. You could see that. Well, that's Xi Jinping's personal dream, I would say. The Chinese dream, so-called. Well, what the party say to advocate? Nationalism, popularism. I remember that young lady, raised the question whether the 80s, the young students of the 80s or 90s, whether they care about the democracy at all. I see people nowadays, they care about pragmatism, opportunism, and the facial, the state government, they will emphasize on fascism and militarism. Well, that's more recommendations for the solution. They have a lot of their substitutes for all good things. Yeah. Whenever you name just one good thing in the world, they will have an equivalent. Not exactly equivalent, but they will try to substitute.
I have to conclude this session. We have only left 10 minutes for discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. We have finished all these. We just left 10 minutes for discussion because the building will be closed in 20 minutes. We will leave 10 minutes for evacuate. So, okay.
Okay, I have a question for Fu Chung Siren, Mr. Fu Chung Siren. So I heard someone told me for the second generation of Tibetan, they do not support Dalai Lama's middle way. And so, you told Chinese Democrats, we need to work hard to convince the second generation of Tibetan people to understand them. But when we understand them, if they change the way, and it's first question. But still we have a lot of space to talk about the future. It does not mean we will use a violent way to serve the conflict. The second point is that I want to make some remark about the second session discussion. You know, at Columbia University, my academic focus is comparative political transition. My conclusion is also most of academic research shows that those kind of macro conditions, historical, you know, socio-economic, international, and cultural, and many factors Professor Shaohua Hu and Professor Huang mentioned doesn't matter to the specific transition. It's play a role, but we cannot predict in a specific transition. So in the human being and the political history, world political history, a lot of transition happened when those countries under some kind of factors and situation. You mentioned, Professor Huang mentioned, especially as Professor Huang mentioned international condition. It's actually when the Western world take the country as enemy, and the international society can play the most role. If they take the country as cooperative partner, then the transition difficult to happen unless popular uprising happens, because the United States institutional forces will help Chinese government consolidate their regime and their rule.
Just a question, not a statement. You answer.
Yeah. Just short one. I think support for the middle way of the Dalai Lama is not related to any generation. There are people in the younger generation and the older generation, both support and don't support the middle way. But what is underneath that is that there are different strands of thoughts in the people that need to be understood, should not be taken for granted. My reference to the second generation ethnic policy is not with Tibetans. It's more, I think, Yahweh, you would know. In China now, there's a discussion that this preferential treatment for what are called the minorities should be done away with. They should be treated as any other citizen of China. I'm just wondering whether that's a solution that the Democrat Chinese also want.
Okay. 1 minute question, 2 minutes answer.
Okay, good. And my question is for Professor Hu. You said democracy is a tiny part of life and it's not important. Let me ask you a very simple question. Is life important to you and to everybody? And is rights to live in his or her own place or on his own land important? Is justice important? Is liberty and dignity important? Without democracy, can all these be guaranteed? That's the question.
Yeah.
I think in many ways I try to play a devil's advocate, because in the United States, and when people think about democracy, they think about democracy is almost everything, and almost everything's good is related to democracy. I just want to mention to you, actually democracy has a very, very limited scope and a very, very, actually very narrow. As I mentioned to you, in your life, in your family, do you have democracy? And can you allow your kids to do whatever they like? In your school, and do you have to follow a rule, right? And for example, my son only have 20 minutes for lunch. And he said, this is not democratic. How can you give me only 20 minutes? So that's the rule. And I give you, I think, one of the best examples. And look at college. Professors should be very liberal and progressive. But if their livelihood depends on their career, they will be very, very cautious. They don't even say what is on their mind, and they will exercise self-constraint. One thing, as a realist, some people criticize a realist like me. They say, well, I'm a scholar. I will tell the truth as I see it. That doesn't mean I like the truth. That doesn't mean I support it. That doesn't mean I don't want you guys to change it. I just want to tell you that's a reality, and probably for most people you have to accept reality. But for some people, for whatever reason, idealistic reason, self-interest, you can try to change reality. And so don't kill the messenger. And also, as I mentioned to you, I'm a scholar. I try to tell you the truth as I see it.
Thank you. Oh, no. Hang on. Oh, wait. Your discussion leave to the, please leave your questions to the dining table, please. Okay, next question. Is there anyone who would like to raise question to other speakers? If not, you can raise your question again.
Okay.
Again, yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a very short question for Butcher.
Okay.
You mentioned that Dalai Lama, you mentioned that in 1961, or no, maybe, I'm not sure, he mentioned that he will not be the leader again.
Yeah.
But until
1992.
Yeah.
No.
Until 20 years later.
69 plus 1992. when he
92,
made
yeah.
a formal-
Almost 20 years later,
Yeah.
he get his promise done, right? Why?
He did not break his promise. He actually, when he said, from that perspective,
Yeah.
because he was experimenting with the Tibetan people, how much the Tibetan people can absorb democratic system. He wasn't going to change Tibetan community overnight into full democratic principles.
No,
So-
you mentioned he said in 1992, he said he won't be the future leader again.
When Tibet issue is resolved.
Yeah.
At that time, he had that feeling. But then he was experimenting with democratic values for the Tibetans by giving them more freedom, seeing how people were able to use it. And then in 2011, he realized that the Tibetan people were ready to accept the responsibility. So he said that.
Any questions?
No other question.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Point question. Okay. 1 minute question. 2 minutes answer.
For Professor Hu's comment, because you said the democracy won't bring you the perfect environment or condition you want to have. But the problem is, even the democracy, the democratic system cannot satisfy everybody. But that already make a huge difference between democratic system or a dictatorial system. We can see a lot of people living in dictatorial system. They suffer so much. All right. So the picture you want to point to us, we all understand.
What is your question?
Yeah. I'm not saying. I'm not bringing up a question. That's just one comment.
Okay.
His comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have only 2 minutes left. Okay. 30 seconds as question.
Is there anything more important than democracy? For instance, as Eric Lee pointed out, meritocracy. Meritocracy means Chinese communist totalitarian kleptocracy or sagocracy. Okay, if there is anything more important than democracy, let me tell you, that's elimination of Chinese communist totalitarian kleptocracy. To eliminate for the sake of the mere survival of mankind, free mankind.
Let me say something which will make you happy. And rule of law for me is more important than democracy. You're a lawyer, right? Are you happy now?
Not necessarily. Without the precondition of democracy.
Okay, that's the end of today's discussion. So we will have 2 more days. We will have more freedom to talk your heart, because we will use our own language. Today, it is pretty hard for us to use a foreign language. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very good. Panelists are good.
我要说一下今天的晚餐了啊，那个就是 Barbara，Barbara 告诉我们，今天我们往哪儿走啊？
Everybody come in with a picture.
Check idols, man. Other practice.
不要，我来看看这个。哎，你贵姓？哦，对，你跟我们一起走到子个店，对。
他说那个他预说有一个卡在哪？就在这个电脑上有个白卡。
这个不是这个后面在的。